The German government has confirmed it's been informed that the U.S. is considering a partial withdrawal of American troops from the country. This follows media reports that President Donald Trump had ordered the removal of nearly 10,000 troops from Germany, almost a third of the U.S. military personnel stationed in the country. A German government spokesperson said that while they've been notified, a final decision is yet to be made by the U.S. DW correspondent Terry Schultz joins me now from Brussels. Terry, do we know why the Trump administration might want to withdraw over a quarter of its troops from Germany?
We don't, Terry. It makes absolutely no strategic sense. You know, there are these stories floating around that he's angry at Chancellor Merkel again for Germany's very low defense spending. It won't reach the 2% level for more than another decade at best. Or that he's angry at her for not agreeing to come to a G7 summit this month because she said, you know, the stage of the coronavirus threat is simply not at a point where I want to travel. There is no reason militarily that the U.S. should want to pull troops out of Germany. It's probably the major military hub in Europe, and it's used not as President Trump often portrays it to protect Germany or protect Europe, but as a staging ground and a training ground for U.S. operations elsewhere in the world. So President Trump would lose a lot of maneuverability if he were to pull troops out of Germany, where, for example, people might be surprised to learn is the headquarters of the U.S. Africa Command. So, yeah, we don't understand it, people who are looking at this from a military standpoint.
You're in Brussels, Terry, where NATO has its headquarters. How has NATO reacted to these reports of a possible U.S. withdrawal from Germany?
Well, as you know, NATO's job is to keep calm and carry on and make sure nobody gets too nervous. And in fact, I had the chance to ask Secretary General Stoltenberg a question about the rumors of the troop pullout earlier this week. And his answer was so bland. He said, well, we're in constant discussion with the United States about troop deployments in Europe. He didn't address the question directly at all. In fact, he did have a phone call with President Trump after this event where I spoke to him. And even after that, NATO officials wouldn't confirm that President Trump had even informed Secretary General Stoltenberg about any specific plans for a troop pullout. So we do have some reports that President Trump might like to move troops to Poland, which does spend 2% of its budget on defense. But that raises other questions about whether U.S. troops should be deployed that close to the Russian border. And there's just hasn't been any definition on these stories yet. But there is a NATO Defense Ministerial next week where Defense Secretary Mark Esper will be getting very pointed questions.
Well, this proposal, which we have to say is unconfirmed, it's already drawing criticism, though, from politicians and defense analysts on both sides of the Atlantic. How likely is it, Terry, that this withdrawal of American troops in Germany will actually happen? Briefly, if you can.
You think I can't read President Trump better than anyone else, but this is a reason why people aren't getting too agitated about it yet. You never know if these things floated out of the White House are actually going to happen or if his military officials will have enough influence on him to get this pulled back before it actually goes into effect.
Terry, thank you so much. That was DW correspondent Terry Schultz in Brussels. Well, Berlin isn't the only ally coming under pressure from the Trump administration. The White House has also asked Japan to significantly boost its contribution to maintaining American forces. The U.S. has guaranteed Japan's defense since the end of World War II. It has more than 50,000 personnel stationed at facilities across the country. Washington puts the price tag at some $5.7 billion, much of which is already paid for by Japan. The cost-sharing agreement is due to be renegotiated next year. Japan is already spending more on defense, but on its own forces.
Soldiers practice landing amphibious vehicles in a picturesque bay on Japan's south coast. Drive out, open the hatch, close the hatch, and then head back to the beach. It's as if they were planning to set off for new shores sometime soon. And perhaps they are. But the officer in command is not allowed to talk to us about that. It's important to train the soldiers. One is the driver, one's the helmsman. It's not always easy to make a team out of them. According to its constitution, Japan isn't supposed to have an army, and many want it to stay that way. We don't want Japan to fight in wars all over the world, not even on America's side. That's why we're against the drills. Even so, Tokyo seems to be preparing to enter the military world stage. The defense minister recently deployed this destroyer to the Gulf of Oman. In an interview, he says it's a completely harmless mission. Taro Kono is aware of his own power. He wants to become prime minister.
Would Japan like to play a more active role, military role, on the world stage?
We believe sending our destroyer to the region to get enough information to secure the safe passage of Japanese or Japan-related ships are important for us. So that's why we're sending it. We're not part of American initiative, nor European, nor Iranian initiative. It's strictly on our own.
Isn't that risky? I mean, there could be some kind of conflict and you are right in it.
Why should we be in it?
But if everything's fine, why you need a warship in the region?
Well, we need to get the information to secure the safe passage of our tankers or other ships. So we are sending them for information gathering. What's wrong with it?
Just a reconnaissance mission? Some people see it differently. US-Asian relations expert Glenn Fukushima, for example, finds the idea amusing.
No, I think as defense minister, that's what he had to say. You know, just as when Koizumi was asked in the Diet, is it not dangerous for the self-defense force to be in combat zones? He said, well, if the self-defense force is there, by definition, that is not a combat zone. So that was his answer.
Behind the scenes of US-Japanese military relations, the mood is less easygoing than here. American military units stationed here still may train for aid missions with the Japanese, for earthquakes, for example. But since Washington has demanded much more money from Japan for US troops, tensions have risen considerably.
It is actually cheaper to have a Marine stationed in Japan than to have them in San Diego. So if we pay more than now, then they will become sort of mercenary. And I don't think US forces would like to do that.
Harsh words, especially coming from an otherwise loyal Japan. Is a possible future government leader seeking to expand his influence in a big way? Insiders say there is support for this in the ruling party, but less so amongst the Japanese people.
For more now, I'm joined by Ra Mason. He's a Japanese foreign policy expert at the University of East Anglia in the UK. Thanks for joining us, Dr. Mason. Do you think the Japanese defense minister aims to formally develop a national military force, and if so, why?
Yes, in the long run, definitely the aim will be to develop a formal defense force. This is because the Constitution, which was, after all, Japanese Constitution is American drafted and American imposed Constitution, has been unchanged for something like 70 years. And this is very unusual as a national constitution of a state with Japan's status. So ultimately, this is about making small constitutional revisions which normalize Japan's international role.
How do you explain the Trump administration demanding that Japan significantly boost its spending on American troops?
That's really about domestic politics. So from the Trump side and from the Japanese side, I mean, in this case, we've been talking about Defense Minister Kono Taro, but really this is at the leadership level. So this goes up to Prime Minister Abe. Both of them have a domestic political agenda which can be played into through this kind of backwards and forwards over defense spending. On the Trump side, he would obviously like to demonstrate that he is coming out of the current crises still in a position of strength and still dictating to his allies and partners overseas how America first will work. And this is about showing he's doing something for the American economy. On the Japanese side, Prime Minister Abe for a long time has wanted to make more use of the Japan self-defense forces and to be able to justify that. Now he might be able to do that by playing off the demands of Trump against the protesters or those that would oppose his upgrading of the Japanese military. So in other words, justify spending money on Japan instead of spending money on having American troops there.
Right. How do you see this dispute between Washington and Tokyo playing out?
I think that's a difficult question. But, you know, as I suggested before, I think there is a sense in which these two positions, Japan's and the United States, are actually aligned in an underlying way. That's to say that on the surface, both the defense minister in Japan, Kono Taro, and President Trump have to show a kind of strong stance that they're sticking up for their domestic audiences. But in fact, those two positions are quite well aligned, because if the Trump administration can demand that Japan pay more, Japan can then justify actually spending more on their own military rather than spending it on the American military. So there might be a kind of little bit of a back and forth, a little bit of a kind of show of negotiation. And then the two allies will ultimately come to quite an agreeable, mutually acceptable position.
Dr. Mason, thank you very much. That was Dr. Rob Mason, Japanese foreign policy expert at the University of East Anglia.